So we're now only a couple months from the launch of the second expansion for Diablo 4, which will come along with a ton of new additions to the game, including some pretty big overhauls to existing systems. And I've been doing videos going very much in depth with pretty much everything we know about the expansion, but for this video I wanted to take a break from talking about expansion specific things and talk about a system that I don't think is going to be getting any major changes with the expansion, but is a system that I think is ripe to get a decent sized overhaul after this upcoming expansion, and this is going to be our Paragon boards. And I did want to start out by saying that I don't think our current Paragon board system is actually broken or really bad in any significant way. I think it was actually one of the more well-made systems because I think it generally accomplishes what it wants to do. Paragon boards I don't think are supposed to be something that adds a bunch of like gameplay changing elements or something that you focus your build around. I think it's supposed to be more of endgame progression that keeps just giving you a little bit more power every time you level up, and I think in general they work pretty well for a system like that, and they were meant to be a much more well-developed system than Paragon levels from Diablo 3, and I think they very much succeeded in that, especially not being an infinitely grindable system. But I do think there could be a small overhaul to this system that makes it just significantly better than it is right now, and more specifically much more interesting when it comes to not only late game leveling, but also late game gearing. Now, before we get into the really interesting and fun things I think they could do with this system, I did want to go over some more quality of life things that I think could really make this system as it is right now much more enjoyable and less annoying to deal with. First off, savable profiles that you can switch between easily. Now, you have a little bit of this with the armory system, but what I'm more talking about is you set up a Paragon board with a level you currently have, and then you can just in a menu save it with a name, and then you can freely switch between any of your saved profiles when you're in any like city or town or anything like that. And we'll obviously have this gold cost, which I don't think the gold cost of this is really that impactful anymore, but you could just pretty freely switch between any of your Paragon board setups. This could also be somewhat nice to allow you to have a bit different boards for different content you're doing with the same build. And you can obviously still use all your saved profiles when you fully switch up your build. So if you're somebody that likes to play a bunch of builds and you want to, you can just take a little bit of time, set up all of your Paragon boards, and then freely switch between them when you're switching builds or creating new builds or anything like that. And I think that would go along with this is code sharing. So this could work exactly like how talents work in World of Warcraft. We could set up your talent build and you can just copy a code and send it to other people, and other people could copy your code and just export it into the game, and it creates that Paragon board selection for you. So that could be something really nice that would also tie into the savable profiles. This would just be super nice because realistically right now, Paragon boards you're probably copying from somebody else because there's not such a massive departure in routing and things like that would really make you want to go apply yourself instead of just going and copying a popular one. Realistically, the main things you're looking for are the board selection, your glyph selection, and then secondary to those, the magic and rare sections, primarily for like getting more defensives. And then another quality of life that could be really good with this is an easier way to apply points outside of if they added a code sharing system. So something that could really help with this is maybe like an auto pathing feature to where you go and can like select a certain point you want to get to, and then it'll auto path and auto put in all the points up to that point. Because a lot of the time you're realistically just trying to go to an area with the smallest amount of points possible, and you could in general just save a bunch of time of just annoyingly clicking every single point. You could set apply a new board and say you want to get right next to the glyph. You just click on like the node right next to your glyph, and then it auto paths like the most efficient straight route to that point or something. Obviously, there would be different routes you want to take to more efficiently get like rare or magic nodes, especially around glyphs and things, but it could help with the large amount of points you have to put in that you're basically just going the most obvious route to get to something to then do the more interesting selections. So I could definitely save some time with just applying too many of these nodes. And then to kind of tie into that, or something that's kind of similar, is auto applying points. This one would be a little bit different. This would be you could apply every possible Paragon point you could earn on that character. So maybe you go apply all of your points, then you could enter like a different selection system and select all of the different points you would want with Paragon points you don't currently have. So once you've set all of this, as you level up, it just automatically puts that new point in exactly where you want it. This could allow people to more easily plan out their full Paragon boards when they don't have the points yet, so they could kind of just get it fully set up, and then as they level, the points are automatically applied into the system. All of these things I just went over are just quality of life things. Doesn't really change up the system a ton, but it would save some time in the less interesting parts of using the system. But that brings us into the much more interesting part. Now, outside of just adding new Paragon boards, adding new glyphs, and generally just balancing what we already have, I think the best thing they could possibly do for Paragon boards is make some amount of gearing matter for the Paragon boards themselves. They kind of have this in the most watered down version you could possibly imagine with the glyphs we currently have. Once you get to the max level or whatever the point is, you can start getting glyphs. You just get all of the glyphs very quickly, and they're basically meaningless to actually obtain. I think that's really the first and main area they should focus on. I think glyphs, how they are now, should kind of be removed, and instead they could have glyphs be an actual loot chase. First off, we could have all of the different rarities of glyphs that do a bunch of different things, and maybe they have some amount of like randomly rolled affixes or different stats, or you could even do something crazy and have up to set glyphs to where maybe these glyphs don't give you anything until you have the set of them, and then they give you different set bonuses instead of how we have glyphs right now. You could have unique glyphs, so you could just have all of the different rarities that do different things. Maybe you have a unique glyph that doesn't like empower any nodes next to it or anything like that, but it gives you some really big initial buff. Maybe you could have other glyphs that have a much larger radius that buff up like all of the nodes in that bigger radius, but doesn't give you anything on the glyph itself. And then obviously one of the best parts about this would be that these glyphs would be actual chase items of all different rarities like the other gear in the game. So instead of getting up to max level and then just basically getting all the glyphs given to you and then you have to go level them up, instead now they could be actual chase items. So maybe they start you with like a bunch of magic glyphs, a bunch of really basic ones like how we used to have, but then as you start getting drops, you can get rare glyphs, you can get legendary glyphs, you can get unique glyphs, you can get set item glyphs. Maybe you could even get like one mythic glyph or something like that. Mythic may be too crazy because we could currently only have 5, which is something they could change. I think even just having these be a chase item that have maybe some amount of random rolls or just a bunch of different options would make them significantly more interesting. They would kind of be Diablo 4's versions of jewels from Path of Exile. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, in Path of Exile, the big skill tree that people keep calling it in both Path of Exile games aren't actually skill trees, they're passive trees. So they're pretty much all passive buffs in a similar way to what Paragon boards are, just they do have some more interesting passive nodes you can get, but they also have areas that you can put jewels in, which are just dropped items in the game that can give buffs to a certain radius, that can just give you like a big stat increases or do other things throughout the boards where you could put those jewels. And realistically, you could just do a similar system to this by using the glyph system. And if they were going to do something like this, in my opinion, I think they should have more areas that you can put glyphs into instead of just the 5 glyph sections we have right now. They don't necessarily need to allow us to have more boards, just have a bunch of different areas that you can put glyphs into. And you can limit it in certain ways. Maybe you could have only a certain amount of like uniques, or maybe you have all of these different slots that you can put glyphs into. And maybe each board has some amount of like score that you could put glyphs into, and all glyphs have like a score. That may get a little bit too complex, but is to have glyphs or some other aspect of the Paragon board system to be actual farmable items with the different rarities we have in game with some amount of like random stats. or at least random effects. I don't think we necessarily need to be adding like a bunch of affixes to these, but you could even have some more basic ones that just give like some affixes or something. And I think legitimately that one change would make the system much more interesting, and they really wouldn't need to necessarily do a ton with the system. Obviously outside of that, there's a bunch of other things they can do depending on how complex they want this system. But because Diablo 4 usually wants to keep its systems a bit more simple, but they also want to keep adding more depth and complexity further into the endgame, I think this is a really good way to do it. Just kind of change up the Paragon boards to allow glyphs to be actual dropped items with all the different rarities to give some potentially interesting effects. That doesn't necessarily make the Paragon boards much more complex, just a lot more interesting with a lot more possibilities within them. So maybe you can actually cook up something for yourself, because realistically in Diablo 4 right now, there's not really any like Paragon board cooking. Pretty much everything is very similar because again, pretty much all of your power comes from the glyph and the board selection, and then you basically just go to the magic and rare sections if you want more defensives or something like that. There's not a ton to it, and there's not really any personal cooking of the board being done, but I think adding droppable glyphs with different rarities could actually do that. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.